Anytime.
Joel Miller, how long have you been in this world?
Oh my goodness. In the world or in the theater
In the
world?
theater world.
In the theater world, I've been, it's over 50 years.
Where did you start?
I started in Los Angeles. And very shortly after my start, I moved to Canada and became a landed immigrant and then a citizen eventually.
This would have been around about.
It was in the mid-60s.
Why?
Well, I was offered a job in Vancouver. Malcolm Black, who was then the artistic director of the now defunct, unfortunately, Vancouver Playhouse, lost his stage manager, and I was stage managing at the theater group in Los Angeles. And he was a guest director there. And he asked me to come up for a season to replace his stage manager. So I said, sure. And I never left.
And how did you get to Montreal from there?
Well, my mother was born here. And so I came out of curiosity. And like Brigham Young, I put my foot down and said, this is it.
Right. And what was the first job you did in the theater here?
Here in Montreal?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been working in the theater long before I came to Montreal.
Yes.
I did 3 years in Vancouver and then a season at Stratford and then 3 more years in Calgary.
All as stage managers or were you?
No, directing. By that time I was directing.
And your first gig in Montreal was?
It was I shared a bill with Michael Sinelnikov of 2 plays by the very famous playwright.
Beckett?
No. It was The Real Inspector Hound and after Tom Stoppard. Thank you. Michael directed The Real Inspector Hound, and I directed After My Grit, a play I had no idea what was going on in, but I faked it brilliantly.
Was that at Centaur?
That was at Centaur, yes.
Right. I remember seeing some of your productions there. Extraordinary. Alan Royal, by the way, sends his regards.
Oh, I should write him. Yeah.
Yes. And so, who was the first person? I guess in terms of mentorship, did you have somebody that mentored you that was very important in your life?
I had several people that were very important.
Who were they?
Going back into my days in L.A., the first one was John Houseman, Orson Welles' old partner in the Mercury Theater.
Yes.
And I was a stage manager in L.A. at the time. Pardon, my voice is gone for some reason. And he found out I wanted to be a director, so he sat me down during breaks when I desperately had to go to the bathroom and gave me 3 so you want to be a director talks. They were very short, they were during breaks, but there was very, very wise commentary that I remember to this day.
And what were the questions?
Oh, I can't remember all of them. Well, yeah, I do remember them as I'm doing them. But one was, always assume if you're directing that everyone you're working with knows what they're doing and allow them to do it and encourage them to do it. And if you don't, then you're going to have to do everything yourself and it's not going to work. And the other advice he gave me that was so wonderful was, when you're directing, you've got to know what you want. He said, 50% of the people who've called themselves directors fall by the wayside. Second thing you've got to know is, when you've got it, there another 25% fall by the wayside. And the last thing you have to know, where everybody but one falls by the wayside, is have the courage to stop there.
Leave well enough alone.
Yeah.
What great advice.
Yeah, it was terrific.
What great advice. Who else, as well as?
Well, Malcolm Black was a mentor. Douglas Campbell, Powers Thomas, and Pierre Lefebvre. Those were the major ones.
What was your first, how long have you been a member of ACTRA? Can you remember?
Since 1984, I believe.
Right. And what was your first ACTRA gig? Can you remember that?
Yes, it was a film called April Morning. Yes. It was directed by Delbert Mann. It was about the incident at Lexington that started the American Revolutionary War. And
great director.
He was a great director, an absolute total gentleman.
Yes.
And it was a really good cast, and I had a decent role, so it was a very good experience for my very first time in front of a camera.
And how was it for you? You had acted before on stage, I know that, but was it nerve-wracking? Like saying, okay, I'm an actor too?
Well, I had a couple of years earlier than that broke out of the prison of directing and gone back into acting. My problem always was that at the age of 14, I turned 45. So part of the push into directing early on in my life was because I felt that I needed, and I was also advised by some very wise people, that I needed to wait until I grew into my age range. It was very difficult for me to play myself.
You were born a character actor.
I was born a character actor with makeup and everything. It was all and funny voices. And so I got the rust off in a production of Hedda Gabler with Diane D'Aquila and the late Neil Monroe. I played Brock, yeah.
Yes, I remember.
And that was my first time on stage in something like 15 years. There was the rust. There I could feel the rust falling off too slowly. But
how did you find the challenge of separating the director's mind from the actor's mind?
I never found that a challenge at all. Yeah.
It's just one. That's a different thing.
It's a completely different activity.
Is there a certain amount of? Oh, thank God, I don't have to deal with all that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. If I had to sit through one more lighting level session, I'd go crazy.
Yeah, and so did you ever work at CBC as an actor?
No, I worked at Radio Canada once for one in the last season of a télé-roman called La Bonne Aventure.
Right.
But never for CBC. Never.
So of course you're bilingual.
Yes.
You work in both languages as a director and as an actor.
Yes, well, I have directed in French, but I work more as an actor in French.
Cool, that's so cool.
When they have somebody that they want with an accent.
Right. And just, what is AFBS for you? Is it good?
Oh, it's fabulous.
Why?
Well, first of all, I find it extremely well managed. And when it came time for me to transfer all my RSPs into riffs, I looked around. I had 4 different RSPs and 4 different accounts. I looked around at all 4 of those accounts, and the AFBS one was by far and away the best. And also the insurance program is outstanding.
And your partner's an actor as well,
yes.
A director as well. So are you both members of AFBS and actor, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you have your separate coverages as members now that you're past the age of something? Or so do you have family coverage or do you have independent coverage?
No, it's independent.
Independent, so fantastic. And that's good for both of you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So tell me about other things that have driven you as an artist, as a person, like politics. You're an extraordinary, well-read person, I know. Personal experience.
Well, I'm very interested in politics. I'm also very interested in history and science. And when I was a student at university, I made the mistake of majoring in theater and minoring in humanities. And if I had my life to live over again, I would have done it the other way around. Because I believe that universities are places where you go to get education. They're not trade schools. They shouldn't be trade schools. And in fact, they're not equipped to be trade schools. But that's okay. So I minored in humanities. That was my academic subject, but it was with an emphasis on history and philosophy. And so I read a lot of history and philosophy. I still do. And I read a lot of science. I've always been interested in science. In science.
Physics?
Physics, well, that's a little bit difficult.
Yes.
But astronomy is okay.
Right. And so how did you put your political interests together with your theater work? Did you get an opportunity to do that?
Quite a bit, quite frequently. I got an opportunity to. It has to do with the choice of plays, and we don't get that much choice in Canada. I mean, the only choice we have, the only right we really have, is a right of refusal.
Right.
And I've only really turned down jobs on a few occasions, and that's always been on the basis of principle. It's always been on the basis of, no, I cannot either direct this play because I so thoroughly disagree with it, nor could I act in it for exactly the same reason. I turned down a role in a film once for that reason.
Do you, when you choose a play, do you look at political potential for what it can say to an audience above all, or just along with other things?
Well, no, it's not part of. It's part of an overall process. I just finished in the fall. I directed a production of Richard III at the Siegel Center with the new company Metachroma Theater.
Yes, I read about it. Yeah.
They're fantastic actors, and it was a wonderful experience. The political relevance of Richard III to today, especially with what's going on in Syria and places like that. I mean, the 20th and 21st century has had tremendous amount of experience with tyrannical dictators and murderous dictators. And so a play like Richard III speaks very strongly to a contemporary audience. But the choice isn't always mine, you know, as I say, we have the...
You're offered gigs.
Yeah.
Right. And did you ever think of, or did you ever start your own company that had a life of its own, where you did a specific kind of play?
I was part of a company called, what was it called, Bill?
POV.
POV. And that was founded by the late Svetlana Zilin, Harry Stanjowski, another colleague of ours, Simon Sachs, and myself. And the mandate of that company was to do Montreal playwrights. Right. And do the creation of new works by Montreal playwrights.
Right. Do you have any particular artistic partners that you've had a long-term relationship with that are very central to your work? Designers, actors, writers?
Yes. Writers and actor, because he does both. Vittorio Rossi is probably the one I've worked with the most on a consistent basis. But I also very much cherish my relationship with David Sherman. And as far as designers concerned, Eric Monkerson, lighting designer extraordinaire, I think, and Vincent Lefebvre, Pierre Lefebvre's son, who's a really great set designer.
And what do you think determines that those relationships are the ones that you go, yeah, I got to work with this person again? What is it about them? Is it a like mind about aesthetics?
Well, yes, it's partly that. Although I'm always open, I really want to be surprised. I want people to surprise me, especially as a director. I don't like to impose too much on productions. I totally agree with Simon Callow's characteristic of the theater as being a directocracy, and that's as a negative example that as the late great Michael Mawson used to say, directors must be artistic, but they must not let their art or make their art drown the art of their colleagues. It's got to be collaborative. But for me, the thing that's most important is communication, a line of communication. Do we understand each other, and are we, you know?
Do you think that film, television, in this country is important to Canada?
I wish it were more important than it actually seems to be to the powers that be. I find it very disturbing that we don't have the right of distribution in this country. I believe that goes back to, was it Borden?
Yeah, that's right. It goes back to Borden.
Yeah. Who didn't see the value in it and so didn't fight for that.
Hadn't read his marks.
Yeah. Hadn't fought for that right. So as a consequence, in English, we have become basically day players for foreign filmmakers. The French situation is enviable.
Yes.
They make their own films. They have a film industry in Quebec.
And an audience.
And an audience.
Yeah. And I think, are you of the mind that if the cultural funders and the government agencies say that telling our own stories is important, that it has a direct result in good work?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Well, it seems to me that in Quebec, the funders and the government, they believe that Quebec stories or French stories are good for French people to see, and correspondingly, the work is good.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I believe that what sparks artists more than anything else is being able to express their own community's greatest fears and greatest hopes.
Do you have hope for Canada?
Hope springs eternal.
If you're going to give advice to a young artist or young actor getting into the business, what would it be? Besides don't.
No, I wouldn't say don't. You mentioned Len Doncheff, our mutual friend. Len used to say to young people, go away. Don't do it for at least 4 or 5 years. And if at the end of 4 or 5 years you absolutely have to do it, then come back and then do it. I think that's very decent. That's very good advice. I'm not sure how easy that is to follow.
Practical is not.
Yeah, I don't think it's very practical, but it is good advice. But it puts a seed in people's minds that they got to approach it with a little bit of care. It's not an easy life. And I make sure that everybody that I talk to in terms of young people who want to go into actors understand that. And so I really emphasize that they need to prepare for the future. They need to prepare for those long periods, frequent long periods of time in which they're unemployed. They need to have something else to do for a while that they can do when they're not being employed, when they're not working either in the theater or film and television or radio.
Do you think we've become more, especially for the younger generations, a culture in theater and film of generalists? Like you need to direct, you need to write, you need to self-produce, you need to do all these things.
I don't think that that's a negative thing. I think that to a certain extent we have. And so I wouldn't say general, I would just say polyvalent.
Oh, I like that.
I don't know if that's an English word. I know it is in French. It means people who can do a number of things. That isn't true for everybody. There are people who are strictly actors and don't do anything else. And Douglas Rain pops into mind. And I remember once I happened to run into Douglas in Winnipeg when he had just directed the one and only show he's ever directed in his life, which was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, in a double bill with Eddie Gilbert's production of Hamlet. And Douglas absolutely couldn't see himself, never direct again. He couldn't stand it. He could not stand directing. And they're fine. I mean, he's a great actor, brilliant actor. But a lot of people now, I find that doing more than one thing in the theater it has a mutual feeding quality to it. In other words, directing other actors feeds my acting, and acting feeds my directing. It just goes back and forth all the time.
Couldn't agree more. Going back to young artists coming in, or young actors in particular, if you had a piece of financial advice to give them, and you probably don't like giving financial advice, but if you did, what would it be?
Well, I'm not a financial advisor, but I would say really prepare for the future. Make sure that you have an RSP. Make sure that there's some kind of thing going on, that you're investing in something. In other words, because we work sporadically and we go from job to job to job to job, we tend to spend all the money we make as we're making it. We don't, so saving is a real effort. And I wish I had been better at it when I was before now.
Is there this is always a silly question, I don't know why I think of it, but I'll give you the option of saying several examples of greatest moments for you in your career.
Well, apart from the fact that when I was 6 years old in grade 1 and I played the North Wind in a school spectacle, it was great. It didn't have any lines, it just wore a white sheet and went, and everybody froze. It was fantastic. The power was amazing. In terms of seeing or in terms of participating? Well, both. I'll give you both. Yeah. Seeing Peter Brook's production of The Visit with Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine, which I saw when I was in university back in the early 60s, was one of the most memorable things I've ever seen in the theater. And to this day, that was over 50 years ago, to this day, I remember moments from that production. It was just like crystal clear, imaginative, not attempting to be scratch your armpit realism. It was very theatrical and an incredible story, all wrapped up into one absolutely magnificent production with great acting. Then another memorable experience that I had, which was really memorable, was I was the stage manager on the original production of The Ecstasy of Rita Joe by George Riga, directed by George Bloomfield, and Riga was in that's where I got to know the two Georges, and Francis Hyland and August Schellenberg and Chief Dan George, and it was quite an astonishing experience. It was.
Can you describe the opening scene of that? Do you remember what he did?
What George did?
Yeah, with the kids running on stage and the opening night audience it was quite shocking.
Yeah.
The Indian boys being chased by rednecks.
That's right.
Yeah. If you think of it, when he did that,
yeah,
people used to wear furs to opening night.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Like they were, my God, what are these people doing on our stage?
And the controversy that the play created in Vancouver at that particular moment was, 64, 65, was electric. There were people that were stood and cheered and were very happy, were just thrilled with finally this subject is being raised. And then there was the other half of the audience who was totally outraged. And how dare you do a play like this in our theater?
George told me a couple of stories from that production. I would have loved to have seen it. God.
It was brilliant.
Right. And in terms of your Montreal career,
yeah,
like what are some of the great moments for you?
Well, one of the great moments was taking over a production at the Centaur with 2 weeks left in the rehearsal period, one of which was production week. It was Vittorio Rossi's very first play called The Chain. And I walked in after the director had to leave, and it turned out that the director had done nothing for 2 weeks. And the play wasn't even finished because the director kept telling Vittorio to go home and rewrite the scene. So Vittorio was not able to finish the play. He had a draft that was complete, but the director wasn't working with it. So I came in, Maurice Padre, the then artistic director of the Centaur Theatre, came in with 2 bags full of various versions of the play that Vittorio had been by. So I read the first one and loved it. And I said, this is the one you should work on, Vittorio, get to work. The first act was in very good shape, so I met up with the cast and said, your first major acting job is to pretend we have the full 4 weeks of rehearsal. The second major acting job is let's get to work on Act 1, because that we have, and let Vittorio go home and write Acts 2 and 3. So he did that, and we rehearsed Act 1, and then we set that up really quick, fastest blocking I've ever done in my life. And each day, Vittorio came in with a new act. Until by the end of that first week, we had the whole play, we had done a run-through, and then we went into the theater for production week, and it just got better and better and better. And opening night was one of the most, A, thrilling, and B, greatest reliefs of my life.
Any other things that jump out in your career in Montreal?
Here in Montreal, yeah, well, the recent one of Richard III, that jumps out. I had a lot of the students at Concordia University, where I work part-time, are very talented, and we've done some very good work together, and I've done some shows that I'm quite proud of. I'm proud of them in terms of their show. There was a very good production a number of years ago of Spring Awakening, and one of my favorite was an Austro-Hungarian playwright who died in the 30s named Erden von Horvath. In my opinion, one of the greatest playwrights of the 20th century, and nobody in North America has ever heard of him. Oh, it's very good. Anyway, the play I did at Concordia was called Don Juan Comes Back from the War, which is the end of the war in question was World War I. And Don Juan has come back out of the war and is going to look for the fiancée that he betrayed many years earlier. What he doesn't know is that she died of a broken heart. And so the whole play is about his looking, his quest. Von Horvath is a brilliant playwright. Also, I recommend his play called Tales from the Vienna Woods.
Right, yes.
And it's all in the Christopher Hampton translations.
Right. As an actor, what's the gig that you're proudest of?
Well, the most fun I had was in a play by David Sherman called Have a Heart, where I got to play the old grandfather who was a cross between Jackie Mason and I can't remember the other two. Those comics. And that was quite an enjoyable experience.
And on film?
Fairly recently, I did a film that didn't go anywhere because it was a Canadian film. So it had 4-day run, I think, at the Forum Cinema, and then went to pay-per-view or something right away. It was a film called Everywhere, which is a really wonderful script and a really good director and a very good cast. I was in it with Patrick McKenna and Julie Breton and Véronique Leflaguet. It was in English.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, cool. Is there, this is hard to say because you work with so many great people, but is there an artist that you admire the most?
I can't say the most. That's like asking me what's my favorite composer and what book would I take to a desert island with me. But Carroll O'Connor, the late Carroll O'Connor of Archie Bunker fame.
Why?
Well, I saw him, he worked a lot in LA at the theater group, and so I first saw him when I was a student do the best Captain Shotover I've ever seen in Heartbreak House. I mean, he was a really extraordinary actor. And then I stage managed a couple of productions he directed, and then stage managed a couple of more productions he acted in. He was a very, very important person to me. And Douglas Campbell.
Yes.
And Powys Thomas.
Yes, Powys. I was just working with JoJo. We talked a lot about Powys.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as retirement?
Nah.
Why
we die with our boots on. But the marvelous thing now about getting my riff, and I've got my Quebec pension plan now. That sort of, for the first time in my entire life, I've got a steady income. It's small, but it's steady. So I can a little bit pick and choose.
The only retirement I want is to be able to say no to something.
That's right. Me too.
Right,
That's what I figure I can do now. So now I can pick and choose the projects I want to do.
I'm going to ask you to say for me, if you don't mind, AFBS.
AFBS.
Thank you. That'll just be a snippet. And do you know that it's the 70th anniversary of ACTRA?
I was not aware of that.
Would you please say for my ACTRA colleagues, happy birthday, ACTRA?
Happy birthday, ACTRA.
Good. Anything else that you would like to share with us, and just in terms of go do this?
I was once asked by a group of students at the end of a semester what my best advice is. And what I told them was never, ever, ever run for a bus.
Okay, I think that's a good line to go out on. Thanks very much, Joe.
Thank you. Good questions.